Efendim şimdi söz sırası Sayın Geoffrey Payne'de.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for this chance to make a presentation. I realized when I was making some notes that it's more than 30 years since I started doing research on issues of housing and urban growth in Turkey. My last project here finished in 2004, so I'm delighted to have this chance to come back again. I hope you'll allow me to make a few comments reflecting on my experience in Turkey and also in other countries, and reflect on points which I think apply not just to Turkey but to countries facing major social change and urban development issues. Of course, the key issue to all of this is globalization. Governments, communities, the private sector, all of us are directly and indirectly affected by the flow of trillions of dollars every day around the world looking for a home, just as people are on the move. And it's people moving from towns and into cities and from one country to another, which presents the planning profession of municipalities and national governments with enormous challenges. What I find impressive, though, is the way in which ordinary people are reacting and taking advantage of opportunities. When you see people with virtually nothing making a life and building not just their houses, but helping to build the city, it seems to me quite a humbling experience. We, as more fortunate professionals acting and observing this scene, I think have a responsibility to see how we can help ordinary people to realize their aspirations. Now, what are the options for planning in this situation? It seems to me that the key to a successful land and urban housing development strategy is diversity. All of us in this room have different needs today, and we will all have different needs in 10 years' time. No government, no matter how sophisticated and incentive, can anticipate all these needs. What it can and should do, it seems to me, is to act as the referee or the regulator or an enabler to encourage individual developers, large corporations, and communities to meet the needs of existing urban settlements and the needs for settlements in the future. Now, of course, with towns increasing in population, this means that new land has to be developed. A number of ways in which diversity can help to achieve this objective is through partnerships. International experience suggests that there's a whole range of examples which have been tried. I don't have time to go into detail on any of these, but I will put a summary of my paper on my website for those who are interested. It's www.gpa.org.uk. Among the examples for new development and partnerships, it seems to me, are joint venture companies, planning briefs, requests for proposals, and land pooling and land readjustment, all of which have been tried in various countries throughout the world. None of these, of course, has all the answers. There's no policy objective, it seems to me, that has only benefits and no limitations. The question is, which is the most appropriate and what adaptations need to be made in order for a given option to work in a given place and time. Another question which seems to be central to this issue is that of regulatory frameworks. The planning, laws, regulations, standards, and particularly the administrative procedures which determine whether development takes place inside or outside the legal framework. Now, I've been doing recent research on regulatory frameworks in many countries, including Turkey. And what we found was that in all countries, the administrative procedures are the factors which represent considerable impediments, not only to the private sector, but to individual communities and households. It is a major factor that if time costs money, then the more time it takes, the more money it will cost. Regulatory frameworks, it seems to me, and audits which we've undertaken suggest that considerable improvements can be made to streamlining the administrative process and to revising and reviewing standards and planning regulations. We found in Ankara, for example, that the administrative procedures were a constraint both to the private sector and to individual communities, and that some changes could well be made, although in fact it often proves extremely difficult to make such changes. A third and equally important issue, it seems to me, is the question of tenure and property rights. Now, this issue has come to prominence, partly due to the work of Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto, and his book on the subject of the mystery of capital, but more particularly through the High-Level Commission on the legal empowerment of the poor, of which he is a co-chair. At the same time, there's another organization, the Global Land Tool Network, which has been promoted and sponsored by UN Habitat, and they're adopting a more socially based approach to the issue of land tenure and property rights. Now, the gist of the High-Level Commission's approach has been thought to be that of promoting land titling, individual property ownership. We heard yesterday that ownership may be very, very desirable for many people, but not necessarily for all people, in all places and at all times. In fact, as I say, diversity is the key to a successful housing market, and that means we need to give place for private rental, for cooperatives, and cooperatives, of course, has a long tradition in Turkey, and also maybe communal forms of land ownership. I think there is a range of options available from international experience, of which some examples exist in Turkey, and this could follow. I know time is very short, and I'd like to go from this general concerns to some observations in Turkey. Having worked in Turkey, as I say, for some years, I was very, very impressed when I came here, first of all, to see how the squatter process had been developed to accommodate not just thousands, but ultimately millions of people, and provide them with not only land, but housing and employment. I now know 4 generations of one single family in Dikmen in South Delhi, moving internationally, South Turkey, Ankara. And for them, I can see that they've now moved from being migrants from a village to being gecekondu owners and now the proud owners of apartments. They've done this over a period of 20 years, I suppose, and countless other generations have done similar activities. This amazing achievement, it seems to me, was the outcome of a pragmatic approach by the municipality in Ankara towards informal land and housing development over many years. This has allowed the mahallas and the local communities to have a central role in the identification and the meeting and satisfaction of local needs. The success of this process has lifted millions out of poverty and helped Turkish cities to meet the needs of their populations. When I travel the world, I've been saying in many countries that actually Ankara has solved its housing problem, not because it still has squatters, but because it's identified a way of addressing the problem which is communally based and has addressed the needs perceived and real of the local community themselves. People were not forced out of their houses. They actually had the chance to redevelop them themselves according to the plans prepared by the municipality. I'd like, if I may, briefly to show 5 slides. And I think this will perhaps illustrate the purpose. In the 70s, as we know, Ankara, with other cities, was growing extremely. Gecekondus from one horizon to the other. Next, please. At the same time, next slide, please. At the same time, the housing for the middle income groups was developing apartments which were extremely high density and in many cases had lower standards of living than many of Gecekondus. Next, please. Many of the low-income groups then moved to the suburbs and started building large amounts of houses. Next, please. building their own individual houses in ways which actually provided very adequate housing on the ground for families. You didn't have to live on the 10th floor. You could be surrounded by open space, relatively high densities, and locally based needs being addressed by the municipality. Next, please. Once the area developed to a certain extent, a squatter family, a Geoffrey family, would then do it with a developer, and the result was that the schemes that followed, next please, led to solutions which we see being promoted by the government now. In other words, the private sector was taking over areas according to market demand. The benefits, I think, were interesting, was that the benefits were going largely to the Geoffrey owners themselves. Now, they'd worked for 10, 20 years before these processes were able to take place. But the benefits of the process did go to them and the developers and ultimately to the cities themselves for the generation of revenues. I'd like to end by saying that it seems to me that Turkey and Ankara in particular should not be ashamed of the processes of Geoffrey formation. You call it misurbanization. It seems to me that it's a natural process of moving people at large numbers over short periods into selected urban centers. What Turkey has done, you should be proud of, not ashamed of. You've actually done a great deal to lift millions of people out of poverty. I go around the world telling people of your success in actually encouraging these processes of transformation on a locally based, market-sensitive basis. And I would urge you caution in concentrating too many of your policies and programs on single, large housing estates in the suburbs. We in Britain, and particularly in France, as you'll know from the riots in the suburbs last year in Paris, have spent many years having to redevelop areas in the suburbs, large housing estates, because they cause immense social and environmental and economic problems. The spaces between the buildings do not always end up as parks. They often end up as places for gangs and drugs. Certainly that's our experience, and I would certainly not wish that on Turkey. Thank you very much.